One of the most important songs on Taylor Swift's album, The Tortured Poets Department, is the song The Tortured Poets Department. This song is the title track for a reason. It not only gives us an inside look into Taylor's relationship with Matty Healy, but it also gives us an inside look into Taylor's state of mind and intention in writing this album. The song The Tortured Poets Department is actually one of the key pieces of evidence that led me to the conclusion that Taylor's relationship with Matty was not a significantly romantic one, but rather an artistic one. Understanding this song helps us understand Matty's role in Taylor's story and the album as a whole. By the way, I'm Mary, and this is part of my deep dive into the Tortured Poets album from the perspective of a songwriter and a former English teacher. I know a lot of people will point to the bridge of this song, where Taylor mentions Matty putting a ring on her finger. We'll get to that. So as we get into the lyrics, it'll help us to keep in mind the basic structure of a song. The verses of a song are usually where a writer lays down the foundation and the details of a story. The chorus is usually where they share their main idea, and the bridge is where they usually go deeper and expand on their point. So when it comes to the song The Tortured Poets Department, Taylor uses the verses to lay the foundation of her story. She shows us details of her relationship with Matty in the form of snapshots, if you will, of their private moments together. She begins in verse 1. You left your typewriter at my apartment, straight from the Tortured Poets Department. Matty Healy is a big fan of typewriters, so it's a reasonable assumption that he's being depicted in this song. And right off the bat, Taylor contextualizes their relationship, or at least the purpose of their time together, as a creative one. Her apartment was where the Tortured Poets Department took place, and Matty was there not for the purpose of fooling around as lovers, but to write and create. We'll come back and talk more about the meaning of the Tortured Poets Department. For now, Taylor continues in line 3. I think some things I never say, like who uses typewriters anyway. Context is important when interpreting lyrics, so given that the overall tone of this song is a positive one, we can interpret Taylor's thoughts here as coming from a place of affection. She's not mocking him with disdain, instead it's coming from a place of amusement. What this line also tells me is that Taylor is not romantically enamored of Matty. He's not on some sort of pedestal for her. There is closeness and affection for sure, but this is the closeness of friends who poke fun because they know of each other's eccentricities. And Taylor actually refers to this later in the song when she says, who's gonna know you? Who's gonna troll you? Taylor shows us just how close they are and how well she knows him by continuing in line 5. But you're in self-sabotage mode, throwing spikes down on the road, but I've seen this episode and still love the show. Who else decodes you? Taylor is saying that she understands Matty completely, and has for a long time. She's fully aware of his complicated public persona and the things that he says or does that sometimes lands him in hot water. At the time of Taylor writing this song, Matty was in hot water for a few things he's done and said publicly that year. I've talked about this before, that Matty Healy is really a performance artist, and so much of what he does is an exploration and commentary on the topics that interest him, such as the media and the culture of fame. What Taylor is saying here is that she decodes him. She understands him and his intentions behind what he does, even when others may not. She knows who he really is despite his public persona. And this is a sentiment shared by other close friends of Matty. In a 2023 interview with the New Yorker magazine, Jack Antonoff, who is a mutual friend and collaborator to both Taylor and Matty, said this: I think Matty is a deeply sincere person who can, at different points, be misunderstood because of how much he enjoys a bit. If you don't know him, if you don't get him because you're not really tuned into the work, you might assume a cynicism that is literally not there. So by Taylor saying, who else decodes you, she's telling us not only how close she and Matty may be as friends, but more importantly, how close and aligned they are as artists. Taylor carries this sentiment into the chorus. Who is going to hold you like me? Who is going to know you if not me? And she ends the chorus with the same line, but this time she answers her own question and says, who is going to hold you like me? Nobody. No fucking body. Nobody. When I first heard this song, the lyric "no fucking body" hit me so hard because it's 5 syllables of bitterness and pain that seemingly came out of nowhere. This lyric is so revealing because it's the only lyric in this entire song that gives us a glimpse of just how deeply vulnerable Taylor may have felt during that time. To me, these lines of Taylor asking Matty, who's gonna hold you or know you like me, she's really saying the same thing of herself. Who's gonna decode her? Who's gonna hold her? Who's gonna know her? Nobody. Nobody understands her. Nobody is there to hold her. Nobody really knows her. And this interpretation is confirmed later in the bridge of the song when she says, so tell me, who else is going to know me? So here in the chorus, when she answers her own question with no fucking body, she's expressing just how utterly alone she felt. And at that moment, she's telling Matty, there's nobody else. It's just me and you. The only thing we've got is each other. And she doesn't mean this in a romantic way. How do we know this? Because of what she says in the rest of the chorus. Taylor says, I laughed in your face and said, you're not Dylan Thomas, I'm not Patti Smith. This ain't the Chelsea Hotel, we're modern idiots. There's so much to unpack in just these few lines. Dylan Thomas was a famous Welsh writer and poet. Patti Smith is a legendary American songwriter and artist. Taylor comparing herself and Matty to these two figures is incredibly revealing in what it says about their individual artistic identities and aspirations, and about their relationship with each other. Let's look at the comparison of Matty to Dylan Thomas. Dylan Thomas is regarded today as one of the greatest poets in history. But during his time, his critics didn't see him this way. It was hard to put him in any traditional category because his work bucked convention. His writing was criticized as being too obscure and too self-indulgent, and his work was often overshadowed by his reputation as a drunk. He was so defined by this public persona of being an alcoholic that when he died, the cause of his death was widely speculated as being from alcohol poisoning or even drug overdose, when in reality he died from untreated pneumonia. So when we consider all of this, it makes sense that Taylor will compare Matty to Dylan Thomas. As for Patti Smith, she is celebrated as a pioneer of punk rock, and really what she did for rock and roll music in general. She combined rock music with poetry, and her writing challenged people and connected people in their shared humanity. There's a humanistic core in Patti's work, just like how there's a humanistic core in Taylor's work. Meaning, when we peel away the layer of Taylor's music and look past the shiny, glamorous, well-produced global pop superstar of it all, what we find are the shared experiences and stories that connect us as human beings. Grief, fear, insecurities, courage, resilience, and so much more. It's clearer than ever, especially with the Torture Poets album, that Taylor is doing with pop music what Patti Smith did with rock music. Now, by comparing Matty to Dylan Thomas and herself to Patti Smith, Taylor is also telling us something significant about the nature of her relationship with Matty. It was not romantic. There are so many figures Taylor could have used for these comparisons. If she wanted to portray her and Matty as creative partners who are also romantically involved, she could have compared Matty to Robert Mapplethorpe, to her own Patti Smith. Robert was Patti's partner in life and art. He was her friend, muse, and lover. But Taylor didn't do that. Taylor could have also compared herself to her hero Stevie Nicks and Matty to Lindsey Buckingham. Lindsey and Stevie were famously known for their relationship as creative partners and also lovers. But Taylor also didn't do that. Instead, Taylor compared herself and Matty to Patti Smith and Dylan Thomas, two artists who had nothing to do with each other. In fact, they didn't even live in the same generation. Dylan Thomas died when Patti was just a child. To me, knowing that Taylor is a meticulous songwriter, she didn't just randomly compare herself to Matty Smith and Matty Healy to Dylan Thomas. It was a deliberate choice made with intentional consideration. These two figures could not be mistaken to have had a romantic relationship, and Taylor wanted to make that statement about her and Matty. I'll continue in part 2. When people mention the theory that Taylor Swift and Matty Healy had been long-awaited lovers of 10 years, a very practical question I ask is, then where are the songs? Where are the songs on the Torture Poets department depicting two people who pined for each other for 10 years finally being able to be together? If their relationship was that romantically meaningful, then surely Taylor would have written about it. By the way, this is part 2 of my deep dive into the song The Torture Poets Department from the perspective of a songwriter and a former English teacher. We're in the chorus, and I was just talking about how Taylor comparing herself to Patti Smith and Matty Healy to Dylan Thomas was a deliberate choice to depict the nature of their actual relationship as an artistic one instead of a romantic one. Dylan Thomas and Patti Smith had nothing to do with each other. In fact, they didn't even exist in the same generation. The only thing they shared in common was the Chelsea Hotel, the iconic building in New York City that was famous for being a bohemian haven for artists who have left enduring legacies, such as Andy Warhol, Janis Joplin, and Dylan Thomas and Patti Smith. So if Matty is the Dylan Thomas to Taylor's Patti Smith, then their Chelsea Hotel is the Torture Poets department. And that's what Taylor already told us at the very beginning of the song. He left his typewriter at my apartment straight from the Torture Poets department. It was always about their art. It was not about them being lovers. Taylor and Matty are artists aspiring for a legacy like that of Dylan Thomas and Patti Smith, whose bodies of work transformed culture and left a lasting impact. That's why Taylor will poke fun at themselves, saying, "Who do we think we are? Dylan Thomas? Patti Smith? What is this, the Chelsea Hotel? We're just two idiots who think we're doing something culturally meaningful." If the chorus of a song holds its main message, then what the chorus of the Tortured Poets department tells us is that Taylor's relationship with Matty was not an intimacy of love, but rather an intimacy of art. Taylor has actually repeatedly said this, like in her poem for the album, where she pounded her fist and screamed it was not a love affair. She's made it very clear. This is being supported by the details that Taylor shares with us in the verses of this song. We saw it in verse 1, and we can see the same thing in verse 2, where she says, "You smoked, then ate 7 bars of chocolate. We declare Charlie Puth should be a bigger artist." These are the representative snapshots of their private time together, hanging out, smoking and binging on junk food, and talking about music. The most physically intimate depiction we see is in the next line. "I scratch your head, you fall asleep, like a tattooed golden retriever." Now, I've said this before, Taylor and Matty definitely shared a certain level of closeness, affection, and even attraction. But this depiction we see here is not of the intimacy of lovers. We know this because we've seen Taylor write about romantic intimacy and physical passion. She did extensively on the Reputation and Lover albums when she was with Joe. Take, for example, the song Dress from Reputation, in which Taylor describes her eagerness to consummate her feelings for Joe, saying, "All of this silence and patience, pining in anticipation. My hands are shaking from holding back from you. Carve your name into my bedpost, 'cause I don't want you like a best friend. Only bought this dress so you could take it off." That is Taylor depicting the passion and intimacy of a romantic love. So if Taylor and Matty were truly long-awaited lovers of 10 years, a very practical question is, then where are the songs? Surely Taylor would have written about such a monumental turn of events of being finally able to be with the person she had pined for so long. But when we look at the songs on the Tortured Poets Department album, the most intimate ones about her and Matty are Guilty as Sin, which is about her being judged based on the assumption that she and Matty were lovers, when they actually never did anything, and the song The Tortured Poets Department, where the main focus, as we saw in the verses and the chorus, is their artistic endeavor. And the depiction of their peak of their physical intimacy is her scratching his head and him falling asleep. There are no songs depicting Taylor and Matty in romantic intimacy or physical passion because that was not the nature of their relationship. Taylor ends verse 2 with the stanza, "But you awaken with dread, pounding nails in your head. But I've read this one where you come undone. I chose this cyclone with you." This is similar to what she said in verse 1, but the most important line here is, "I chose this cyclone with you," which is directly depicted in her Fortnite music video. The Fortnite music video is what Taylor described herself as the perfect visual representation of the stories she tells on the album. I did a 3-part deep dive for that if you want to get into the details, but what we saw in that video is that this cyclone represents the media whirlwind that surrounded Taylor and Matty's public relationship. I emphasize public because in the music video, Taylor depicts it as a literal experiment, which leads back to my theory that her public relationship with Matty was a bit. I'll come back to this a little later, but right now at this point in the song, the line "I chose this cyclone with you" is giving us more context for the next new section of lyrics we're about to encounter, the bridge. The bridge of a song is an expansion on the main idea that's already been established in the rest of the song. So far, Taylor has spent the entire song establishing that the focus and nature of her relationship with Matty was an artistic one. So this is the context we need to keep in mind as we enter the bridge. But before we do that, there's one more thing we need to talk about for the sake of context, and that is, what exactly is a tortured poet? The Tortured Poets Department is the title of the album, it's the title of this song, and it's the Chelsea Hotel of Taylor's relationship with Matty. Understanding the meaning of a tortured poet is crucial for understanding Taylor's creative inspiration and intention. A tortured poet or a tortured artist is a stereotype. The term is used to criticize an artist as being too emotional, too dramatic, or too self-indulgent. It's actually a term that's used to make fun of artists for taking themselves too seriously. Taylor knows this, yet she chose to embrace this identity, not just as any torture poet, but as the chairman of an entire department. Her doing this is incredibly meaningful to this era of her life, both creatively and personally. By embracing the identity of a torture poet, Taylor is embracing all of herself. no longer held back by the fear that she may be too emotional, too dramatic, or too much for someone else. This is Taylor's era of unrestricted freedom. When we look at how Taylor saw herself at the end of her relationship with Joe, we see her often referring to the relationship as a prison or death sentence. In so many of her songs, she uses the analogy of imprisonment or death and dying to describe how the relationship affected her physically, emotionally, and creatively. And as she mourned the breakup and eventually came to a place of peace, we see her write about this using the analogies of newfound freedom and coming back to life. We see it in the song Soul on London when she says, "And I'm just getting color back into my face." We also see it in her poem for the album when she says, "Spring sprung forth with dazzling freedom hues." Taylor was no longer confined by that relationship. She was no longer trying to make herself small and change herself to make her partner happy. Like she said in her poem, she was no longer dimming her shine. Taylor was now free to rediscover herself and fully embrace who she is. So the Tortured Poets era is really an era of cathartic revelry, meaning Taylor is finally able to fully express everything she couldn't express during her 6-year relationship. We see this in just how frank and straightforward she is on this album in writing about the things that had plagued their relationship, issues of fidelity, sobriety, and the toxicity of their dynamic. I think this surprised a lot of people, and some were so taken aback that it was hard for them to accept what Taylor was saying about Joe. But if you pay attention to Taylor's music since Reputation, she's been writing about these issues for quite some time now, just never this directly before. Post-breakup, Taylor was no longer living within someone else's limits. She's able to be the freest version of herself. In my opinion, Matty Healy was actually the perfect person to come alongside her during this time, because one of the things that Matty values the most is personal and artistic freedom. After years of having suppressed herself emotionally and creatively, Tortured Poets is Taylor reclaiming her personal and artistic freedom, even at the risk of being misunderstood or seeming self-indulgent. So this is the context we need to keep in mind as we approach this album, this song, and this bridge. If the bridge of a song is where an artist expands on the main idea, then the bridge of the Tortured Poets department is Taylor expanding on what she established in the rest of the song, that the purpose of her relationship with Matty was an artistic one. And in this bridge, she shows us just how far she was willing to go to reclaim her freedom of personal and artistic expression. I'll continue in part 3. This is part 3 of my deep dive into the song The Tortured Poets Department by Taylor Swift, from the perspective of a songwriter and a former English teacher. We're at the bridge and we're approaching this section of the song with the meaning of a tortured poet in mind for context. In part 2, we talked about how the idea of a tortured poet symbolizes this era as Taylor finally reclaiming her personal and artistic freedom after years of having suppressed herself emotionally and creatively in her relationship with Joe Alwyn. The bridge is also where an artist expands on a song's main idea. Taylor had spent the entire song up to this point establishing that the purpose and nature of her relationship with Matty Healy was an artistic one. This was to prepare us for what we're about to see in the bridge. I know a lot of people disagree with my theory that Taylor and Matty's public relationship was a bit, and that's okay. But just try approaching this bridge without romanticizing their relationship. Try it with a new perspective. Taylor says, "Sometimes I wonder if you're going to screw this up with me, but you told Lucy you'd kill yourself if I ever leave. And I had said that to Jack about you, so I felt seen. Everyone we know understands why it's meant to be, 'cause we're crazy. So tell me, who else is going to know me?" What's interesting to me here is that she brings up a version of the refrain again, the phrase, "who else is going to know me," about a shared understanding that exists between her and Matty. By this point, we've seen this refrain over and over again in this song. Who else decodes you? Who else is going to know you? Who else is going to know me? This refrain is the undercurrent of this entire song. It continuously begs the question, who understands Taylor and Matty aside from themselves? And it's not until we get to the bridge that we see what Taylor's talking about. When we look at the overall structure of the song, Taylor spends the first half of the song establishing that her relationship with Matty was a creative one. She shows us snapshots of their private moments together that are pretty platonic and really focused on their artistic endeavor. And throughout that, Taylor repeats this refrain and idea to Matty of, "But nobody decodes, nobody understands us except me and you." From a storytelling perspective, this is Taylor building up to the thing she's actually trying to talk about. And as the audience, it's prepping me and leading me to ask, what is it that I'm not decoding? What am I not understanding? And the song builds up until its climax in the bridge. Line 7. At dinner, you take my ring off my middle finger and put it on the one people put wedding rings on. And that's the closest I've come to my heart exploding. This is the lyrical representation of what the audience witnessed in real life in Taylor and Matty's public relationship. This is the climax of the song. This is the moment that Taylor has been building up to. This is what she was preparing the audience to see by first establishing in the rest of the song that her and Matty's relationship was not a romantic one, but an artistic one. And I believe this is what the refrain of the song is addressing when Taylor keeps on saying to Matty, who else decodes, who else knows and understands us except you and me? Nobody. When we approach the bridge from this perspective, we can see why she would say, sometimes I wonder if you're going to screw this up with me. Without automatically romanticizing Taylor and Matty's relationship, we can see that she's talking about this thing that they're doing, this stunt, this bit, the act of being in love. And she wonders if he'd screw it up because the whole thing really puts them both in a very vulnerable position. Because if either of them chickened out and left the other hanging, it would have played out very poorly for the other person. But that didn't happen. They both committed, and then the whole thing was over. When their quote-unquote breakup was first reported, a source told People magazine that Taylor had fun with him, but it was always casual. They are no longer romantically involved. And when there were rumors that Taylor and Matty were so enamored of each other that they were going to get back together, People magazine reported a source close to Taylor saying, they are absolutely not together. It's all BS. And they also quoted a source close to Matty saying, it's complete nonsense, not true at all. People tend to interpret this as a sign that Taylor and Matty had some sort of fallout, but I think it's more that they're trying to shut down any lingering belief that these two are romantically involved. The bit was over. For me, the over-the-top behaviors that are depicted in the bridge, them saying they'd kill themselves if the other left, Matty putting a ring on Taylor's finger, these are all put in context when Taylor says, everyone we know understands why it's meant to be. Not why we're meant to be, why it's meant to be. 'Cause we're crazy. That's an interesting thing to say about two people if they were supposed to be a perfect and long-awaited romantic pair, that they're crazy. And this reminds me of what Jack Antonoff said about Matty in the New Yorker magazine, when he literally said how much Matty enjoys a bit. And mind you, this article interview happened in May 2023, the same month of Matty and Taylor's public relationship. So you see how things can come across differently if we don't automatically romanticize Taylor and Matty's relationship? Now, you may be wondering, but why would Taylor go as far as doing a bit with Matty and pretend that they're in a romantic relationship? Just for the sake of art? Not quite. On one hand, yes, I think doing this helped Taylor overcome a long-held fear of hers, which is being misunderstood and judged by the public. But I believe they primarily did it to spite Joe. So this goes back to my theory about what might have actually happened between Taylor, Joe, and Matty. I did a post about this a while ago, but basically my theory is that Joe never liked Matty and his friendship and collaborative relationship with Taylor. It was probably very obvious that Taylor and Matty shared a lot of personal and creative chemistry. And that probably made Joe very insecure, and he might have even suspected that if he and Taylor ever broke up, Taylor might actually end up dating Matty at some point. So after Joe and Taylor's breakup, I believe Joe might have tried to get ahead of the public fallout and leaked a story out to the press about Taylor possibly being romantically involved with Matty. Doing this would have accomplished two things. One, it would have diverted all the post-breakup press attention onto Taylor and Matty instead of focusing on what might have gone wrong between Taylor and Joe. Two, it would have brought on so much public scrutiny that it would have sabotaged any chance for Taylor and Matty to actually ever date. I believe this was the betrayal that inspired Taylor to write the song, The Smallest Man Who Ever Lived. But in response to this betrayal to the press, instead of trying to fight the allegations, Taylor and Matty decided to not only go with it, but to play it up to the max. Because they knew the media frenzy would be inevitable, but it was also to throw it back in Joe's face. If Joe was going to sow the seeds of public scrutiny that he knew would come to Taylor and Matty with such rumors in an effort to sabotage them, then he was going to now have to watch them publicly act out the very last thing he probably will want to see, which is Taylor and Matty holding hands, being physically affectionate, and publicly declaring that they love each other. So in the bridge of the Torture Poets department, when Taylor describes Matty putting a ring on her finger, the person that will be most impacted by that depiction is Joe. Remember, Taylor as a songwriter writes to express. She writes as an outlet for herself and as an address to her subject. Here, she's not addressing us, the audience. We're just third-party observers of whatever is going on. This scene in the bridge is the most impactful and meaningful to Taylor herself, Matty, and Joe. Matty is depicted doing something with Taylor that Joe never could or would, putting a ring on her finger. And after a 6-year relationship, Taylor says, "That's the closest I've come to my heart exploding." Wouldn't that just kill you if that was your ex with a guy you never liked? Then Taylor ends this song with an outro, which is a final section of lyrics that ends a song. A Taylor Swift outro is very distinct and meaningful because she often uses the outro to distill the central message of her song. This is where she usually brings a song full circle and states the thought or emotion that she wants to be the main takeaway for her audience. We see this in other songs on the album, like Fresh Out the Slammer, I Can Fix Him, So Long London, and here in the Torture Poets department. She says in the outro, "You left your typewriter at my apartment, straight from the Torture Poets department. Who else decodes you?" Taylor began the song portraying her and Matty in the Torture Poets department, and she ends the song with it. This is the image she wants us to have of her and Matty, not as lovers, but as creative partners. And there's that refrain again, asking, who else decodes you? She ends this song with the lingering question, does anybody else understand what she and Matty were trying to do? So, this brings us to the end of the song. And at this point, I could go one of two ways with this deep dive. I could either go more in depth into my theory about what I believe happened between Taylor, Joe, and Matty, or we can talk about these books of poetry that I believe Taylor published under different pen names. I mean, she didn't call it the Torture Poets department for nothing. She did, in fact, write a ton of poetry that chronicled her relationship with Joe and all the grief and anguish that inspired their songs on the album. So you guys let me know which one you want me to talk about next.